Welcome everybody to this week's Lumix Live. We are obviously back in the studio. Last week we were out in the field. So if you joined us for that stream, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun doing a Q&A stream from, actually out in the field, not having to be stuck here in the office. So if you are joining this Lumix Live platform for the first time, welcome. These are weekly broadcasts that we do here on YouTube every single week, Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central, where we talk about a very wide range of topics. Everything from video assist tools to kind of like the topic we're talking about today, which is the different recording options available in a number of different Lumix cameras, and giving you some insight into what they do, where they can be found, how you can set them up, and doing some demonstrations on how they work. But we also sometimes have guests on. We're working on a new program where we're going to start having more guests starting next month to actually join us and provide some insight into their work and offer an opportunity for all of you to see some other really cool creators out there that are using Lumix equipment. Throughout these programs, let's see here. Let me check my volumes. Streamlabs says that I'm pretty much peaking. Okay. What was I saying? So some of the other topics that we cover are pretty in-depth. We've shifted the format a little bit with these kinds of streams where we are pre-recording the topic that we're talking about so we can go more in-depth into the actual content that we're producing. So during that part of the stream, feel free to drop your questions down in the chat and I'll be answering them via text. But also I'll save a few of them for afterwards for us to do an actual Q&A live and address things that y'all have questions about. Couple things to get out of the way before I dive into answering some questions and we actually jump into the topic is I want to remind everybody, as I do every single week, about Lumix Pro Services. We have Lumix Pro Services here in the United States and abroad. In the US, we have two tiers. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available. The Red is a free program for everybody that buys a Lumix camera. So if you own a Lumix camera, check out the Lumix Pro Services Red. You can get it here in the United States. You can use the QR code on screen and check out the Red service. The biggest thing for that is that you're going to be getting the 3-year extended manufacturer warranty just by registering the camera on Lumix Pro Service Red. You also get access to the platform in case you want to upgrade to the Platinum tier here in the US. But the basic tier gets you that program. You have access to repair tracking. You don't have to go through any kind of major kind of channel that we normally have electronics repairs, since we are an electronics company. So this is dedicated just for Lumix products and imaging products. If you're someone who likes to have, kind of that extra level of service behind your equipment, you can definitely check out the Lumix Pro Service Platinum series here in the US. That is a paid level service. You get all of the content that the Red level gets you, but in addition to that, you're getting 2-day repairs with free next day shipping both ways. You have access to potential loaner gear if repairs are going to take longer than the estimated time or the stated time for the program. You also get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you needed to send a camera in because it was broken or lens because it got dropped, you get a discount on the out of warranty repair for items like that. You also have access to tracking, getting your equipment cleaned and serviced throughout the year should you want to make sure that your equipment is in tip-top shape. And that also includes things like lens calibrations, firmware updates, cleanings, all that fun stuff. So I encourage you all to take a look at least at Lumix Pro Services Red here in the US. For the US customers, if you are new to registering for this program or you've registered recently, the welcome kits and the welcome information can take a little bit of time to get your stuff set up as we verify the equipment that you've got, that all the information's there. So you will get emails from that team if there's something missing or they needed more information for your registration. So be sure to take a look in your inbox, even in your spam folder in some cases, in case it gets flagged for spam. Let's see here. What else am I missing? Yes, we do also have Lumix Pro Services globally. We have a link down in the description that will let you go to the portal that will show you all the regions that are currently online with that. So you can be sure to check out what's available in your region and the different tier programs for those particular countries. What else? There was recently a firmware update for a number of cameras that came out back on the 25th. So if you've got any of the S series cameras, well, the S1H, S1, S5, and BS1H, or if you have a GH5S or a BGH1, be sure to go to the link that I'm dropping in the chat right now and get the firmware updated. The update includes some refinements for anyone that's using the Blackmagic RAW functionality out of those cameras for white balance accuracy when you're working in post with it. So maybe not for, super useful for everybody that's not using Blackmagic RAW if you're using an external recorder for it. But it is always good practice to make sure your cameras are updated, as things come out, because they are always refining and smoothing things out, despite whatever the major headline update is for that particular camera. So let's see here. Let's answer a couple of questions before we jump into the topic today. Let's see here. Keith says, I know that you can use the S1R to have 4K 422 over HDMI cropped at the cost of not recording internally. If you choose that, does it make full HD also 422? If I remember right, I don't have my S1R. I don't have battery in my S1R at this moment. I believe it is specifically the modes that you're choosing will get your 422 output over HDMI when it comes to the S1R. Knowing that the S1R is not a video tool, it wasn't ever really designed for it because of the higher resolution. There are some just different limitations with that particular platform, but I'll double check. I'll throw a battery in my S1R and see when I connect it to my Ninja if the 10-bit output or if the full HD output is in 422 as well. So let's see here. Pete says check volume. I definitely raised it up. Streamlabs says I'm clipping, so I want to be a little careful with that. Hopefully it sounds okay now. Let's see here. Chris says, any chance the S1H can get vertical frame markers, 9x16 like the S5 for shooting an open gate? I know Matt and I have asked about this. I'm honestly not sure if the S1H is going to get that firmware or have that added to it, but it is something that we will ask and try to follow up with everybody on too. So let's see here. Missed being live here. I may have missed this in some previous episodes, but did you have a chance to look at the changing face to focus on G90 and G100 while recording a video? I completely forgot. I'm so sorry that I completely forgot about checking in on that. I will take a look at that. If you want to reach out to me over email that we post down in the description or at the end of the end bumper on this video, just to give me a little reminder, that would be a big help, and I can take a look at that after the stream for you today. Let's see here. How long does it typically take to get your welcome package? I've registered 2 cameras now and still haven't received anything. It's hit or miss. It depends on what the load is of how many registrations they've got. And then just getting them turned around and verified. I can double check, Tommy, if you reach out to us. I can try to see if I can get that team to get me some information. Yeah. So here, Total Tennis says, does the GH5 Mark II not have EX Tele for video use anymore? It works in photo mode on your GH5 Mark II, but not video. Does this have anything to do with the lens? Thanks. So the GH5 Mark II does have what a lot of people used as EX teleconverter for doing a sensor punch in. It's just now called image area of video. So it goes pixel to pixel or full on that camera. It's a different name. We did a topic on this a couple of weeks ago. Because of the way people were using it as a video tool, we just shifted it into the video tools and called it really what people were using it for. So let's see here. Brick says, I sent an email to you earlier asking, didn't receive CF Express card Delkin, and Delkin 2TB CF Express cards didn't receive CF Express card, and Delkin 2TB CF Express cards are approved from Panasonic GH6. I don't think the Delkin cards have been approved yet. I do believe that they are being tested, so I will follow up on that, and I will check my email to see about your CF Express card. And find out what's going on there. If anyone that's having potentially some issues getting CF Express cards or shipment, if you're in the U.S., I can help pretty easily. If you're outside of the U.S., it's a little more challenging since I'm only I only work in the U.S. team, so I don't have all the contacts and the different regions with the way they're handling it. So I'll do my best to try to get you some help there, or at least get you pointed in the right direction for the local region that would handle those requests. Dennis, hey, welcome, Dennis. Also wondering about the S-Series RAW white balance update, wondering if anything has changed metadata-based white balance now. As far as I've heard from many third-party developers, white balance used to be burned in both ProRes RAW, according to ProRes RAW and Cindy DNG converted developer, and BRAW. I still have to actually do a little bit of testing. I don't have a Blackmagic Video Assist here to do any actual testing on my side, so I can give you an answer that I'm actually confident in giving. But my understanding is that it does open up a lot more accuracy and more capabilities in Resolve with Blackmagic RAW. It is something I would have to take a look at. So. Let's see here. Also wondering on GH6 if an OpenGate 4K ProRes mode would be possible. Also wondering about 4K 48 and ProRes since 4K 60 is already there. Yeah, it's definitely one of the things Matt and I are pushing for. As soon as I get an update, I'm going to let everybody know. I love having the ProRes options in the GH6, so any more that we can add there would be awesome. So yeah. Super Zero, will there ever be an updated Nocticron that's weather sealed or weather resistant? We don't state weather sealed on cameras and lenses. Honestly, don't know. Yeah, I just don't know. Let's see here. Purchased a Lumix Nocticron and saw there was a firmware update recently. Did it improve AF speed for photo and video? Yes, so the firmware updates, which you can find at that link that I dropped before as well, the firmware updates with a lot of the lenses recently have been to add compatibility with different functions that have been added in cameras like the GH6. So if you've got a bunch of lenses, make sure to go take a look at the link that I dropped a little while ago, which is our firmware download page. Take a look, get all your lenses firmware updated because it refines a lot of things for things like 24p recording on like the GH6 and some other cameras. It also brought more compatibility with some of the newer features that were added in, specifically like in the GH6. So yeah, you definitely want to make sure you get lenses firmware updated as they get released. Let's see here. Caption says, GH6 question, when can we expect 10-bit uncompressed output in resolutions and formats greater than 4K 60p to the Ninja 5 Plus? That I don't know. Some of that stuff depends on whether or not the recorders can do it. Others depend on the HDMI spec on the cameras. The GH6 is very unique in this case, is that it can support the 4K 120. So we do have the 4K 120 raw output for the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus. So it is there. I just don't know any of the roadmap or anything for the 10-bit output files for ProRes. I can ask and see if I can get an answer, but I'm not sure when I'd be able to get an answer for you on that. Let's see here. There are some reports that the latest firmware seems to cause a glitch image preview on some S5 owners. There's some images on Reddit. I will take a look. If it's on the Lumix Reddit page, I will definitely take a look and see what's going on. I'll also check with my camera, and then yeah, we'll get that reported over to the team if there's an issue. Let's see here. We'll do one last question, then we'll jump into the topic today. GH6 question: when using 1080p HDMI monitor, is there any way to set up FN keys to switch HDMI output downscale to 1080p and crop to middle section for fine focus. Not that I know of. I don't think there's a way for that level of diving into the menus for a single button press to switch modes. It would still have to be relatively manual. And part of that is also that when you're changing downscale outputs and you're changing the resolution that's going to a monitor, that information needs to be sent to the monitor. The handshake has to happen for the resolutions to change over. So yeah, there's some challenges there. We can ask. I probably don't think it's going to happen because it's a fairly uncommon use case, but I always love to be proved wrong. So if that is something that people really do want to see, let us know in the chat, and it can help us take a look. All right. And then Dan just asks, is the latest firmware in the S5 version 2.3? I think I saw a 2.4 somewhere. The current version is actually 2.5. You can take a look at the link I dropped in the chat before, and that is where all of the firmware updates are housed for all of our cameras, where you can get them all updated. So with that, let's jump into the video recording options that I recorded a little bit earlier today. And keep your questions coming. Drop them in the chat. Tag at Lumix Camera so I can see it, and we'll keep this going. All right, so we're going to be talking about a number of these different options that are available for different kinds of recording and ways that the camera can support you while you're actually out creating. So that's going to be things like variable frame rate, the slow and quick function, 4K live crop, as well as things like focus transition. And we've talked about these in the past, but we're doing a very specific, this is what these features are, this is how they work. So there's a reference piece out there for everyone to be able to come back to if you want more information about it. So a little starter here, we're going to kick this off with variable frame rate. Now, variable frame rate is an option in the Lumix cameras that's designed to give you a pre-slowed down piece of footage so that you don't necessarily have to go into software in post and then conform a 60p clip down to 24 or 30 down to 24, so on and so forth. This will do it for you and basically takes a step out of your editing process. In the past, with cameras like the GH5 and even the S1H, the variable frame rate functionality in those two particular cameras is going to be within an 8-bit codec. So shooting things like log can be done as long as you're making sure that you are paying very close attention to your exposure, and you're not really going to have to maybe push the file that hard in post. You still can do it, and it's still a viable way to shoot, but it really benefits in those two particular cameras when you're shooting in something like natural or Cine D, Cine V, like 709, the different profiles that are closer to a deliverable kind of profile. But that being said, we're using the GH6 as the demo camera for this right now, since it shows the widest range of what's available. And while not every frame rate is going to be available in all the cameras, the menu, it's the most current, most recent way to actually do this. So how do you get into variable frame rate, right? So to start with, we're going to click the menu button, which is going to bring up the main camera operating menu. We're not going to use quick menu for this, at least in this demonstration. And you'll see a couple of things here. We're going to go into rec quality because there are certain recording quality modes that have the ability to shoot in VFR and some that don't. So we'll go into rec quality, and I already have the camera now set right now at full HD, 24 frames per second in 420 10-bit long GOP. When you're in this particular mode, you will see a large amount of information provided in the kind of info window that goes next to the frame rate there. You'll see what recording compression you're in, what container you're working with. In this case, I'm working with an MOV file. It's 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second, so on and so forth. But underneath the bitrate option, you'll see VFR available, HLG available, and then recordable slot. And again, this is particular to the GH6. So if you're somebody who wants to use variable frame rate, you want to make sure that you are selecting an option that says VFR available. And you do have to be in the creative video mode to use this as well. So just make sure you're in the actual creative full-blown video mode on this camera. So we're going to select the full HD 24 frames per second. This is 100 megabit and it's a 10-bit long-op file. Once you do this, the variable frame rate option in the menu is now going to be available. If I were to come in here and select one that doesn't allow me to do variable frame rate, like the 422 10-bit, you'll see that variable frame rate is not selectable, and it'll tell you it's because you're in the wrong resolution and bitrate combination. So let's go back here. Let's change this back down to 420 10-bit, and then we're going to go into variable frame rate. Now here, this is where I can come in here, I can toggle variable frame rate on, and I have the options to over and under crank this sensor. So under cranking the sensor means that you're going to look more towards a stop motion, or not really stop motion, more like time-lapse or hyperlapse style video. And over cranking the sensor means that you're going to get more of the slow motion effect. So you change these options by using the rear command dial on the camera. So first, we're going to take a look all the way down at the lowest end. So I can do a 24 frames per second video file that outputs or only records 1 frame per second. That 1 frame per second that is going to be captured means that every 24 frames, it will actually only be recording 1, and will be then compiling that into a 24 frames per second video. So in order to even see any of this really work or have 1 second of video, you need a 24 seconds of time to actually be able to record this, because you need 24 frames for 24 frames per second. So what you'll see is that you're getting a 2,400% increase in speed. So perfect for time-lapse, hyperlapse style shooting where you don't want to go into post, do all of your edits that way, and then maybe see what it looks like later. If you do it this way, it's giving you that sped up video file already in the camera. And on the GH6, like we said, this is in 10-bit. So you are getting a 10-bit file that is very friendly to work with in log, and it's shooting in HEVC at 100 megabits in this particular case. So you're going to get a very efficient compression codec that will handle a pretty good amount of push and pull in post for your editing. Now on the flip side of this, this is where as you start to go up, you'll see 24 frames per second. You can select 24 frames, and then you're going to have slow and fast effect is going to say it's 100% because you're recording the correct frames for the output frame rate. But I can start going up 26, 28, 36, 48, 60, so on and so forth. And you'll see that the effective slowdown is going to be shown in percentage to you. So most of the cameras that you'll see coming from us, you'll be able to go up to a certain point without any additional crop or loss of one like push button AF when it comes to variable frame rate. In the GH6, that shows up at basically none. When you're in full HD, you're able to go all the way up to 300 frames per second, and it's no additional crop, no additional problems there. The effect that you will see is that certain lenses, when you go over certain frame rates, you do need to make sure that your lenses are firmware updated so that they support the push AF. Some lenses don't because they don't have the faster motors that are required. They tend to be a little bit older lenses. So you just want to pay attention a little bit to some of that, for what lens you're using and when you would need push AF while you're recording. But what's really cool about this is, again, in the GH6, I can do 300 frames per second output on a 24p timeline that gets me a pre-slowed down piece of footage. This will be 8% speed. So really, really slow, really easy to access and get into. If you want to actually select this mode now, you just press the set button. You see that you get the exposure change because you're exposing as if you're shooting 300 frames per second. And when I come back to the main camera kind of window here and we're looking, you'll see on the top bar, it says MOV, Full HD, 420, 10-bit, long GOP. And then now in VFR, you'll see 300/23.98 space, full. This tells you that you are recording at 300 frames per second, outputting in 24p as your final video project. If I were to come in here into variable frame rate and then adjust this all the way down to 1, you'll see the same exact thing. It says 1, 2398, that's the output, and the exposure adjusts accordingly because of what it is that you're actually shooting at. Now, the other thing that you'll see too is that I have my camera set up in using shutter angle. Your shutter angle, depending on the certain one that you're working in this case, because we're shooting at one frame, I need to have, in this case, a 45-degree shutter angle. So it needs to be a faster shot than the 180 degree, because 180 degree at one frame would be the full 24 frames. So the system is designed to basically set everything up that you need in the parameters for how you're trying to shoot and use this camera. Now, obviously, if you are using variable frame rate because you want to shoot high frame rate functionality, this is great for cameras that don't have native higher frame rate options. In cameras like the GH6, it's a little different because you have options like 48 frame, you have full HD at 120 frames per second, you have full HD at 240 frames per second, and 4K at 120. So there are options to do this where you're actually shooting the full resolution and or the full frame rate, and there are advantages to doing that. When you use VFR, you don't have audio and you have limited focus capabilities. When you are doing it in the actual native frame rate, so 120, 240, 480, those different frame rates, that's where you get the ability to use autofocus, you have audio. It just makes the system work much easier if you're someone who still needs that audio level in your actual recording. So that's basically variable frame rate. Now let's take a look at my S5 and take a look at the slow and quick option, which is fairly similar to variable frame rate, just in a different deployment depending on the camera you're working with. All right, so now we're looking at my S5. So this is the S5 on the version 2.5 firmware. So the most recent one that we have. You don't necessarily need it for any of this, but that's what we're working with right now. Now, on a camera that uses the slow and quick functionality, there are going to be two different ways to kind of get into this. You're either going to see on the actual camera mode dial an option called S and Q, so it's the little S ampersand Q, or in cameras like the S1, you'll see this as a menu option called high-speed video. Fairly similar in the way they work. High-speed video is a little more limited compared to slow and quick, and much more limited compared to variable frame rate. So you'll see the different tiers of, if you really need a lot of high-speed work and you want to have the pre-slow down functionality, go for an S1H or a GH6 or a GH5. If you need moderate control over those, go for a camera like an S5. If you do it on and off, it's not a huge need for you, that's where you go to cameras like an S1. And some of it's just because over time, as we've developed these systems and the newer cameras came out, it changes what, you know, can be done with the revision of the processor at that time. So, all that being said, we're looking at the S5. I have it in S and Q mode. So a couple of things to notice here. In S and Q mode, when you press the menu, and I go here up into the video options, you'll see the slow and quick settings option is now available. When you're not in S and Q, this is grayed out. So same thing that we do for variable frame rate. I go into the rec quality, and then I have all of these options available that are lit up to select for the slow motion effect. And you'll see that that's, in this case, 4K 30p in 8-bit, 4K 24p in 8-bit, full HD up to 60p in 8-bit, and 30p and 24p all in 8-bit. So the S5 is an 8-bit high-speed camera. So same kind of comments apply as before. If you're someone who works in log, make sure that you are very, very careful with your exposure when you're shooting in an 8-bit profile or an 8-bit codec. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're using this. It's not that big of a deal. You still can edit those files, but you do need to be a little more careful with how much you can push and pull that footage. So again, we're going to be selecting full HD, 24 frames per second, and in slow and quick mode on a camera like this, you'll see that the bit rates are lower than what you would see in a camera like the, S1H or GH6. You're not getting the, 400 megabit, you're not getting 200 megabit. You are getting lower bit rates in these because they're designed more as a, just an additional option. If you really do need slow motion effect and you need high quality slow motion effect, that's where GH6, S1H, cameras like that are much more designed as the proper tool for that kind of capture. But these cameras are designed to also still give you some capability for it, where it can be done and where it fits within the chassis design, the heat management, all of those different parts that we do. So these are designed to be reliable in what they can do given the platform, the physical constraints of the different cameras. So we will go into the 24 frames per second. Like I said, this is 420 8-bit. And then you'll see slow and quick settings. When I click into this, it's pretty much the same look and style as variable frame rate. So the big difference here is that you'll see it'll say frame rate, so which frame rate you're recording at. Right now we're at 180. Then it'll tell you what the multiplied speed effect is. So in this case, it's 7.5 times slower. So some of the nomenclature is designed to be a little more user-friendly that doesn't want to work on percentages for speed. It'll tell you what the actual rec mode is. And then, like I mentioned before, certain cameras will have some restrictions as you go through different high-speed over and under cranking. In the S5's case, if I go to 180 frames per second, you'll see that it's manual focus only, and it's going to apply a slight crop to the image so that you can get that 180 frames per second readout on the sensor. So a lot of that will come down to hardware. Is the sensor able to read out at these frame rates and do it with no crop? Does it need to be cropped a little bit? That's kind of the difference that you'll see, and those are hardware limitations. But as I come down here, you'll see that if I go to 150, there's no crop, so it can still use the full sensor width, but you're getting manual focus only. So your push AF will not work in 150 frames per second on an S5. Then I can go down to 120 frames per second. I get my push AF, I have no crop on the frame, and I'm getting a 5 times slowdown effect when I'm shooting in 24 frames per second. And this mode works very much just like the variable frame rate option. I can keep going all the way down, and I can get myself down to 1 frame per second. Now, this will get me 1 frame recorded. It'll be a 24 times sped up effect, so quick effect, when I'm outputting in 2398. Now, something to remember too is that if I were to come in here and I go up to, say, 4K 30p, and the camera will cycle for the proper frame rate to show up here, if I go into the slow and quick option here, you'll see that in certain modes you have maybe not as fast a frame rates, because again, this goes to what can the sensor read out at hardware-wise in those particular resolutions. So in this case, if I'm in 4K, even if I go, let's do 4K 24, since that's what most people are using slow motion in. If I go 4K 24, slow and quick setting, you'll see that I can do a 60p record, output at 24 frames per second, and it's going to give me a 2.5 times slow motion effect right out of the camera without needing to go into software. Now, just like I talked about with variable frame rate, there's a couple things to look at on the top of the screen here. You'll see that on the top ribbon bar, you get all your normal information, your white balance, what color profile you're in. But here is where you'll see the recording option. So this is the more traditional way that we've had it displayed on our cameras, which says MP4, 8-bit, 4K, 24p, right dead center up top. And then next to that, we'll show you what frame rate you're actually recording in for variable frame rate. So this is a good way to indicate, hey, I'm in variable frame rate, and I know that this is the frame rate that it's shooting at, this is what it's going to output at. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about before is that with variable frame rate and slow and quick mode, you'll also notice on the bottom ribbon of the camera menu here, or UI, you'll see that it says internal mic is being turned off, because you get that little microphone icon with a slash through it. It's because variable frame rate and the slow and quick mode do not record audio. Since you're over and under cranking the image, syncing that audio isn't something that's done with those particular modes. If you need to record audio while shooting at higher frame rates, so say you need 120 frames per second and you need audio with it, that's where you'd want to look at a camera that can natively do 120 frames per second, like the GH6 or an S1H if you're in full HD. So that's slow and quick. It's very similar to variable frame rate. Slight little differences. It's a little more simplified of an option. And then again, the high speed mode, which is found in cameras like the S1, that's even a little bit more simplified. That has some locked options of combinations. So like 180 in 24p, 100 in 25p, depending on the region you have the camera. So there are some limitations if you're working with the high speed mode, as it's just a basic option for some slow motion. So now that we've covered those, let's shift over and start taking a look at some things like live crop and the focus transition functionality. So for that, we're going to need to reset this little setup I've got here so we can show the back of the camera. All right, so now we've got my GH5 Mark II set up right here in front of my GH6. And we're going to talk about, like I said, the live crop or live cropping, as well as the focus transition functionality. And we'll look at focus transition functionality on the GH6. We'll look at the live crop functionality on the GH5 Mark II, since that doesn't output over HDMI for me to demonstrate it. So it's going to be a little awkward in the way I've got this set up. But what you'll see here is in the camera menu, you'll have the option under the actual video recording, under the Others page, to select what's called live cropping. Now, live cropping, when we come in here, you'll see that you're going to get two options here, 20 seconds or 40 seconds. So we're going to set this up with a 20 second. Now what you get is a box that you can reposition anywhere on the frame. So I'm going to move this to the top left. I will click the button, and then I have another option to move this box again. But I can also change the size of this box. So I can make this bigger. Let's say I go something like this. Now I'm going to click the set button, and you'll see that I have those two boxes overlaid on the frame here. So what we're going to do is I've got the 8 to 18 attached here. Let's adjust my ISO just so we can see what it is we're doing. You know, this is not a glamorous one that we're looking at here, so nothing too major. Let's bring that ISO down a little bit. So here we go. So what I can do here is I have the option to, in this case, I'm just going to set this to manual focus because I want to get a point across. So we'll see here right now that the GH5 Mark II is focused on the 105 macro lens that I have there. I have my two boxes. One is in the top left, the other's in the bottom right, and the bottom right one is actually larger. So what you're going to see, and I'll do this from my frame, is you're going to see the image come from here and actually get bigger as it moves down into this corner. So when I do this, assuming I have a memory card in this camera, I will press record, and as you can see now, the camera is actually running that path. So it's going to take 20 seconds to move through that frame, and it's taking from that that tighter top corner all the way to the semi-wide on the bottom opposite corner here for it. So now what you get out of this is when you go back in and you play back the image, when I go back to playback, one, you can hear because I have audio running with it. So we'll actually mute that audio. Is you get a kind of slid image in the camera without the need of going through the process of doing this in post. So the output I'm getting here, it's giving me 1080 because it's using the 4K frame. So that's why when I come back in here to actually take a look at shooting, if I come in to make an adjustment here, that's why the size of the smallest box is only going to be 1/4 of the frame, because it's 1080p. But I can also do other cool things like come in here and I can massively raise the size of this. And you have different levels of adjustment depending on which dial you use for it. So if I set this here and then just come in and punch this all the way in, now when I come in and click record, it starts on the full wide. And then now it's going to do a slow punch in to the frame down to the 1080 region in the middle of the sensor. You have 2 time limits that you can do on this, 20 and 40 seconds. Because it's a fully automated setup, it's not designed, to really, one, it doesn't give you anything higher than 1080 because you have to use a 4K source file for this. And then when I come back and play it back while we're talking, you'll see that you have that repeated effect. So this is great for those situations where maybe you have an idea for a shot, you're in a wedding, and you don't have a slider with you, right? But you want to do something really quickly and just kind of visualize, see how it works. Or you're doing something where you want to be able to offload this and provide a really quick cut of a punch in for an insert into another piece of footage. This lets you do it on site in 1080. If your output's going to be 1080, then it's perfect. And just really be able to quickly do this. The way I've used it before is I'll use live crop, especially in a situation, or live cropping, especially if I'm in a situation where I know I have time to shoot. Run and gun is a little bit harder to do this with, so I understand that not everyone's going to be able to use this the way I do. But I'll do it where I will have the camera set up. I will frame up how I want. I know that I want to have the frame slide through, but I know I want to have it in 4K. So what I will do is I will shoot this in cameras like the GH5 Mark II. I will do this in the 1080 mode first to plan the shot. How is it going to look? Because it's only 20 to 40 seconds. It's really not going to take up much time if I'm on site and I need to be able to quickly shoot something. So I'll do that. But then what I can do is I can see, does this look the way I want it? Is it going to give me the effect that I want to shoot this in 4K? Again, those are setup situations where I've got plenty of time to do that with. If you don't, then you can easily use this just as that 1080p option to output that really quick, kind of punch in or that pan for your video framing, and just add something different to the camera. And this is found in a number of the GH series cameras. So this is an option that you'll have in a number of cameras. The GH6 does not have it. Part of the thing you have to remember with some of these functionalities is that with the GH6 itself, the GH6 being a totally new engine, totally new processor, and totally new sensor, some of these types of features either take longer just to deploy and make them work the way expected, or we're starting to get to the point where we've got more resolution and you evaluate, is this something that can be done at higher resolution? Say on the GH6, could it be done in 4K? Those are the things we don't know at this point, but these are the things that I know have been asked. Why doesn't the GH6 have this mode? Just remember, new sensor, new processor. Some different types of recording can take a little bit longer to create when you're working on an entirely new system that functions very differently than the existing cameras that have been on the market. So in some cases, we've actually improved other areas that the new system is what it allows us to kind of refine. And one of those is the last part that I wanted to talk about today, and that is the focus transition functionality. So like I said, we're using the GH6 here as the capture camera for demonstration. Now, focus transition is an option that's available in some of our cameras, not all of them. But what focus transition does is it allows you to program in set focus poles. So similar to live cropping, if you're someone who knows that I need to be able to you know, have that perfect focus pull from, say, and I always use weddings because I think it's like one of the easiest ones to kind of relate to. I want to make a focus pull from the rings to maybe the bride's shoes or the groom's shoes or the couple's you know, vows or whatever. You know, there's a couple pieces I want to do there. Or if I'm doing scripted work where I know that like I have actors and I need them to be on their marks and I want to have a focus pull, I don't have to rely on an autofocus system, which can have variability in speed that may not 100% be the way you want it, because it may not land exactly where you want it to land, regardless of the autofocus technology. But situations also where manually focusing still also introduces a lot of variability. If you don't pull that focus just right at the right speed, maybe it's too fast, maybe it's too slow, and you want to do this multiple times, having a repeatable way to do this is a big advantage. So we've built in focus transition in cameras like the S1H, the GH6, even in the GH5 series. But with the GH6, we have the new user interface for this. So I'm going to click on focus transition here. Now it says, please set the focus point. So I'm going to have to use two hands for this. And what we'll see here is I'm going to manually focus my lens out to the boxes and the tape that's in the back there, right? So we'll grab that. And then I want to set this as position 1. So I'm going to press white balance. You'll see on the side it says press the corresponding button to set your points. But now I want to have this come into the back of the camera. And I want to have this one set to position 2. So for this particular pull, I'm only going to do 2 positions, but you can program in up to 3 positions if you want. Once that is set, and also so that you see, you do also have the ability to tap on the screen and tap the AF button for it to jump to that point if you don't want to manually focus yourself to figure these points out. But from here, I'm just going to press the set button. And now what you'll see is I have a new display here. I've got a 1 and a 2 because that's what I've programmed in, and I've got the functionality set here. But I also have the ability to come in here and select more options. So I can come in, and if I push the menu set button, you'll see that it lets me come in and change those different modes. So I can do this from position 1 to position 2. And you'll see that it's letting me actually see where that focus is moving and the speed. But say I want this to not be that speed. Say I want to change the speed that it's working at. Well, this is where you click the display button. Now you'll have focus position settings. So this is where you can set those different points. Then you have focus transition speed. This is where I can come in and say, I want this to be super fast. So if I do this again, if I go in and actually enable focus transition, I want to go from 1 to 2. And you'll see how fast you can make this focus pull when you're on SH. This is also a cool way to demonstrate things like focus breathing too, like how little focus breathing this 9mm has when I'm working in a situation like this. So I've got my shot there, but say I want this to go ultra smooth, ultra slow, and make this really simple. This is where I go to SL, come in, and if I click 1, now you'll see that it's going to do a very slow rack to the point. And if I actually select the right point that I want to go to, you'll see that it's moving now, and it's doing a very slow, gradual pull out to the tape that's in the back frame. So that's focus transition. It's a pretty straightforward option, and in the different cameras, you have different ways of setting it up. In the GH series, it was a little more manual to set it up, driving into the menus. The GH6 allowed you to do some more cool stuff with the white balance, ISO, and exposure comp button just for settings, so the user interface is more slick. But yeah, those are the kind of 4 main things that I wanted to talk about today. But I do want to address 2 additional little things that I think often get overlooked in our cameras as well. And that is, if I quit out of here, drop out of the focus transition options, if I go into the menus here, if you're someone who does a lot of long form recording, so what I mean is you've got a camera set up and you're going to have the camera running for a very long period of time. Think of, you're doing survey work, or you're using the camera as, trying to capture something that's happening, but it's maybe not super predictable when it's going to happen. So think lightning storms. If you're using it as kind of like a trail camera for capturing, wildlife on video, stuff like that. We have an option in the cameras, in some of our cameras. So GH series, definitely, and then higher up into the S1H series. We have the option to do loop recording in video. So what loop recording does when you turn this on is it sets it up so that you'll be able to use, I believe it's up to 96 gigs for a singular file. And when it gets to the end of your memory card storage space, it'll start overwriting the beginning of that. So literally, it is a looped record. If you've worked with action cameras before, things like that, any kind of, say, like car cameras, dash cams, stuff like that, they have loop recording options available as well. So this can be great in an environment where you need to have a really high quality camera. If you're doing I use dash cam as a good example, but if you are actually using a camera like this as a ultra high quality dash cam because you're collecting footage, say, you'd be able to use loop recording and then just stop the recording when you get a clip that's got what you want to capture in it. So this can be really useful for things like that. The other option with loop recording is that, again, like I said, if you're doing like trail cam type stuff, if you're filming lightning storms, I know not everyone does those things, but I think they're the easiest to kind of understand. You can just set the camera to record and know that with loop recording, the second you see something happen, you know it's going to be okay, but you can keep letting it go up until you know that you're going to fill that full card space up, because it will start overwriting the earlier data, and then just be able to click stop recording and then save that full clip out. Now, the other part that I think some people do know about, I'm sure a lot of people in the chat here know about this, is called segmented file recording. Now, cameras like the S1H, not all of our cameras have segmented file recording. Some of them do. The GH6 does in this case. What segmented file recording does is it purposely sets it up so that it will record shorter clips when you're doing long form recording. Now, this can be beneficial for a number of reasons. If you're someone who is very, kind of very protective of the content that you're creating, so think a wedding, and you don't want to rely on having a single, say, 96 gig clip of the ceremony. You'd rather have it chop it up into smaller sections. So in the event of, say you're running the camera off DC power and someone pulls the power cable out of the camera, that will cause a file corruption if you just immediately cut power and don't let the camera run its power off cycle. So in a case like that, segmented file recording would allow you to at least have the files that were already written and saved out in that particular setup while you reconnect power, and then the potential loss of any kind of image because of a failure on site for things like that power situation would be minimized. You'd be more likely able to not have to, cut out an entire thing. But segmented file recording also works really well in situations where you've got, just in general, a very long recorded session, and you don't necessarily want to work with a singular, very large file. Now, typically in a lot of cameras, you can force a camera to do this, at least with our cameras. You can force cameras to do this by using an SDHC memory card in cameras like the GH5s. When you do that, because an SDHC SD card forces a 4 gig file limit for anything, that will automatically basically act as if it's segmented. When you use something like an SDXC card, that's where you can get much longer recording times. And I apologize for my dog barking. But yeah, so when you work with cameras like the GH6, we've actually changed the way segmented file recording works on the GH6. I now have the option to come in here and say, I want to do a 10-minute, 5-minute, 3-minute, or 1-minute segment. Where before, segmented file basically told the camera to function as if you were using an SDHC card, which would limit 4 gig file sizes. So a little bit more flexibility on the GH6 now, so that you know, like, hey, I want this to save the file off every 5 minutes, make sure that I've got that stored, and then I'm good to go. I don't really have to worry too much about it. In some cases, this can also make reviewing your footage a lot easier in post as well, because you know, like, hey, that happened at that 5-minute mark. That's where I want to, you know, kind of check that clip or the clip right behind it, and I know that I'm golden at that point for that particular file. I don't have to go through an entire large long form file to find that 1 minute that I knew is what I was looking for. So yeah, that was kind of all of the different options that, you know, I kind of really wanted to talk about for today's particular broadcast. So let's throw it back to live me and address some questions that y'all might have. All right, yeah, so we're back now. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool things that I've loved playing around with in these cameras, and hopefully, you know, you were able to pick up a thing or two from what we talked about today. I want to go back through some of these questions that have come in. I know I answered a lot of them in chat, but there's a couple that I wanted to either give a little bit more information on, and then some that I just wanted to wait to address, to actually verbally address. So one of the questions here was D Creative Visions. Can the S5 record in open gate like the original GH5? No, the S5 doesn't do 6K open gate like the S1H does. The reason behind that with the S5 is the thermal loads. The S1H has the active cooling system designed specifically so that you can handle the thermal load that the 6K open gate recording can put into the system. The S5 being sized down to be a more compact variant meant that certain recording modes that generate a lot more heat unfortunately aren't able to be done in the camera in any kind of reliable sense. So that's why the S5 doesn't do it. That said, you can record in the anamorphic options on the S5, but you're not going to get the full sensor height. You're going to be in a Super 35 region for the 4:3 aspect ratio, which can still be a benefit if you need to be able to do vertical cropping or things like that. You just have to take that crop into account if you're going to be using it in the anamorphic mode, because it is truly more of an anamorphic mode than the, you know, open gate options that we're starting to see a lot more of in our cameras. Let's see here. Andy had asked about, will the 4K live crop come to the GH6? I think I addressed it during the recorded part. I honestly don't know if it's going to come to the camera. Like I said in the session, the GH6 sensor and the processor, they are totally brand new compared to what the previous cameras are. So certain things to ensure quality and performance level need more testing and design. So I honestly don't know if that's going to be something that's going to get added to the camera, or if it is, when it potentially could be added. But we'll definitely keep everyone updated if stuff like that does happen. Let's see here. Alex says, does AFC work in live cropping? I'm experimenting on my S5 now, and I'm not seeming to get AF. I have to double check. Honestly, I can't remember. I think it does, but I'll play around with it a little bit and see. Let's see here. Some of the other questions came in. Keith says, on the S1R, using MP4 containers gives segmented recording with 4 gig segments. The problem is on internal recording sound. There's an audible glitch at segment boundaries. That's a first that I'm hearing about that. I can take a look and see which media source are you using on your on the S1R. I want to try to be as similar in what I test on the camera. So Keith, if you can let me know which memory card what resolution, frame rates, all that kind of stuff you're using. I can try to mimic your experience on my side. Let's see here. Where was that other question that I wanted to address before we wrap up for the day? I highlighted it. And then, yeah, for others, for future pre-recorded, like kind of segments, I'll change how it's being recorded. So I'll have the camera screen much larger, and I'll just put my face cam like up in the corner. So it'll be easier to see on different mobile devices. Let's see. Oh, okay, this is one. Alex asked, will the with variable frame rate, can you bring the slowed S&Q files back to real time in post? You can, as long as you are shooting them correctly with the right frame rates. This kind of goes hand in hand with, I think, one of the questions that FC was asking. So certain frame rates that you want to record in slow and quick or in variable frame rate, you'll notice that you have some caps on what shutter speed can be chosen. And part of that's because of the duration that image needs to be captured within for the output resolution you're doing. Like all of them, it's already slowing it down, so you can bring it back up, but you will most likely need to do some sort of software enhancement to bring it back up to full speed. But it is doable. It's just a matter of making sure you know what the percentage that you would need to speed that footage up as. It's not as simple as just bringing it in and then interpreting as a set frame rate. You can try that. In a lot of cases, if you know that you're going to need the output file, say you're doing this with 60p, or you have a GH6 and you want to do this for 120 frames per second, most cases I would recommend just shooting it in 120 frames and then doing the slowdown in post, because at that point you have truly 120 frames per second footage in that file with audio and autofocus, where variable frame rate really is designed primarily for a slowed piece of footage. You can speed it up if you have to, but your results will be better if you're using a native higher resolution frame rate. Or higher resolution frame rate. If you're using the actual native higher frame rate options in the camera, or what we call HFR options. Let's see here. JC, when we request firmware features here, we know they are submitted, but how are they chosen? Is there an online vote for each request? Not really an online vote, because anything that gets requested has to be evaluated if it's one, even possible to do. And then two, if they, if there's resources to do that particular addition to be added to the camera. So it's, the more we hear in forums like this, on Lumix Live, in some of the other platforms, the more we hear from all of you that this is something you want, the higher the probability is that we may implement. Truthfully, there are a lot of things I know that all of us want in these cameras, but a lot of it does just come down to, one, is it actually even feasible to do in these cameras? It's easy for all of us to just say, it's super easy to do that, just add it in firmware. But I doubt any of us, actually, I know for a fact that no one in this chat, myself included, knows how to write everything on these cameras, and the challenges that it comes into when you add a feature in to make sure that it doesn't break something else somewhere else in the firmware for an operation on the camera. So that being said, keep submitting the requests in firmware. We do select them based on, obviously what the market's asking for, and then also what's feasible to be done in a reasonable time frame. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question for you. Let's see here. False colors on the GH6, please. It's critical to nail exposure in the GH6 to minimize noise. We've definitely had a lot of requests about false color. You have Matt and I's support on false color. I'd love to have it. I believe it's a matter of which false color to choose and put in there, and whether or not it can be added easily into the firmware. So yeah, we will always ask. Let's see here. What else? On your GH4, I cannot select the limit for segmented recording, but it records MOV clips for every 11 minutes and 30 seconds in 4K. Problem is, it skips a frame from 24 seconds when it hits that limit. I don't have a GH4 anymore, so I wouldn't be able to test on the GH4, but I can take a look. Red, I did find your email. I will, I'll respond to it right after this stream. Let's see here. Can we also request for a G90 and a G9 successor? Of course you can request for those things. Doesn't mean I'm going to be able to tell you anything, even if I did know anything. So, let's see here. Alex says, I heard you mention that you're using firmware 2.5 on your S5. I'm not seeing on the Panasonic site. Try opening the link that I dropped in a incognito browser, or clear your browser cache. It's possible that the last time you visited the site, the previous information is still cached in your browser. That's usually what that ends up being. Let's see here. Let's see. Did we get through most of these questions? I think we did. Would love to see a 14-140 with a constant aperture in a Panasonic version. That would definitely be interesting. I don't know if that's something that would be made. Dave says, I'd love 100mm 1:1 macro for Micro Four Thirds with IS. One of the few missing lenses now. Current macros I find a bit too short for insects. Yeah, that's definitely really good feedback. I like that. Let's see here. Let me just take a quick look, make sure I got through all these questions. I think we got through pretty much all of them. Before Jesus Christ. Okay, that was that question. How long was that? Yeah, cool. Looks like we got through pretty much all the questions. So thank you everybody so much for tuning in. And all the awesome questions and comments back and forth that all of you are sharing. This is exactly why I love doing these streams. This is the highlight of my week, honestly. So we'll be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Like I said, for the month of August, we've got a bit of a programming change. We're going to try to get some more people in to actually guest on the program with us. So now that I've got some of my setup internally done, that makes it just easier for me to actually kind of do these. It should be pretty cool. Outside of that, make sure to take a look at the Lumix Pro Service programs available in your country. Again, I'll throw them up on screen. So we have Platinum and Red here in the US. We have different levels available in other regions. Links are down in the description, so definitely go take a look at those. If you don't already, follow us over on Instagram. We're always posting some new content. We're working with a lot of talented creators from across varying different levels of experience and areas of expertise. So definitely go take a look at that. Feel free to interact with us over there. Reach out to us, ask us questions. I am over on Reddit as well as Sean at Lumix. It's been a bit hard recently to respond to messages just time-wise, because this is not my only job with the company. So I apologize if I don't respond as quick over on Reddit for questions that you may ask me, but feel free to ask them. I do eventually get around to checking all of those. And yeah, you can reach out to us at the email address, which is lumixlive@us.panasonic.com, if you have future recommendations for different streams in the future or topics that you want us to cover. If you like the content and you feel that we deserve it, I would appreciate a like, a share, all of that stuff with these videos. And if you really like this content, a subscribe to the channel is a huge help. It just helps me bring this stuff to more and more people. And yeah, if something in here was really helpful and you think it can help others, definitely share the video to them. So with that, thank you everybody so much. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and have an awesome weekend. So take care, be safe, go out there and create some really cool stuff. Later.